afraid of the dark.
Once some police officers were asked about the scariest calls they had responded to. Here's what they told. Late one evening, maybe 10 years ago, we received a call. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor while she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced with no kids, and wasn't expecting anyone. When we arrived, she was standing across the street from her house. She looked visibly anxious, being comforted by her neighbor. Other units showed up almost as quickly as we did and set up a perimeter at the corners of the property. We talked to her, got permission to enter the house, so we figured we'd better announce ourselves right away and search the house. 3 of us stood at the front door, gave a warning, and went in while other agents watched from windows at a distance. The lady was actually cooking dinner before she called us, so the house smelled pretty appetizing. I remember the smell being really nice. Anyway, we searched the first floor and made our way up the stairs, and suddenly we hear it. Clearly, those were footsteps on the wooden floor above us. Don't freak out, oh damn, I hear footsteps. I dashed to take cover. I did all of this very calmly and methodically. We issued another warning, and again, no response except the footsteps start fading away. I quietly ascended the steps, adrenaline pumping through me. I focused on rounding the corner upstairs. I stop a few steps from the corner, catch my breath, and go up. The upstairs corridor was pitch black, and after we successfully checked the second floor corridor, we began going through the rooms. Nothing, no one, not even an animal. I don't think animals can make sounds like human footsteps on a wooden floor. After the initial search, several other officers also checked every nook and cranny, closets, beds, God, even the washing machine, dryer, all appliances and closets were thoroughly searched. Nothing was broken, no one was hiding anywhere. In the end, we invited the lady back into her house and assured her that there was no one there, and we suspected the noise was related to the settling of the wooden composite building and such. None of the officers outside during our search saw anyone coming out from the second or first floors. There were no signs of anyone trying to break a window or door in the house. I spent about 30 minutes there until the lady's friend came to stay with her for the night. I checked all the safety measures and double-checked the windows and doors for tampering while I waited for other officers. She fed me lasagna, and to this day, I'm convinced that I witnessed life from other dimensions that day. Early in my career by the elevators at the CIA headquarters annex building, known as the original headquarters building, or OHB as it's known, had quirks. I think they're still there. Sometimes the elevator would stop, and the doors would open to a floor where no one was. No one in the elevator was going to that floor. I heard through the grapevine that when this happened, here's what you were supposed to do: say good morning, Mr. Director, because it was believed the doors opened for the ghost of Alan Dallas. As many of you know, he was his project, but he never got to move into his office because he was replaced as CIA director, just before the office was ready. I'm not in law enforcement, but this reminded me of my elevator in the apartment complex when I lived in China. So many times when I exited my apartment, the elevator would just open on my floor. It looked like someone was waiting for me to leave my apartment. Once, while listening to music with headphones, I swear I heard a little girl laughing, as if she were laughing next to me in the elevator. I'm a police officer working in the rapid response team in a busy area of London. We were called in on suspicion of domestic violence in a multi-story apartment building. The caller reported hearing screams and sounds of struggle coming from the apartment above. When we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the apartment. The caller said the noise hadn't stopped. I heard nothing as I went upstairs, and certainly no noise from that apartment. Honestly, I heard nothing at all. After 2 knocks on the door, there was no answer. My colleague left me and went downstairs to talk to the woman who called us. I stayed at the door. I knocked again, and after a while someone answered. An elderly woman. She had clearly just woken up and was alarmed to see me outside. I told her we had received a call reporting noise coming from her apartment. I asked her if anyone else was in her apartment. She was greatly surprised and told me she lived alone. She had been sleeping the whole time. I asked her if I could come in to make sure there was no one else. She invited me in, and I entered the small 2-bedroom apartment. The apartment was dark, except for the hallway, where a lamp stood by the bed. I began to search the apartment, and as I approached the last door, my colleague called me on the radio. He said he was coming up and asked if everything was okay. I told him everything was fine, and I wondered why he sounded so concerned. He said that when he was with the woman downstairs, he also heard screams and banging from the apartment where I was. I told him he must have been mistaken, as I was almost finished searching the apartment, and I hadn't heard anything. I must admit, I felt uneasy as I opened the last door. Like in all the other rooms, it was dark but cold. My breath caught immediately. There was no one in the room, and it was just as quiet. I called my partner on the radio and asked him to listen to my footsteps. He said he heard my footsteps, but the screams and noise had stopped. They stopped right when I opened the door. I left shortly after that and apologized to the elderly woman for waking her up. I have absolutely no rational explanation for what happened. My colleague and I left feeling very frightened. "911 operator, I've shared this story before, but the first call about a drug overdose I received right after training stuck in my head. They called from a house full of people, all on drugs, each on different substances. One guy was using heroin, so they dialed 911, and I had to work with them while other officers were already en route. Mind you, during our conversation, I could hear screams and heavy breathing in the background, and everyone in the room was in an altered state. Understandably so, their friend was dying right in front of their eyes. So I tried to walk them through administering emergency medical aid, but not a single person followed my instructions as they were all incoherent. Throughout, they lied to me, saying their friend had just taken a painkiller. This delayed the paramedics, as officers realized it was heroin only minutes after arriving. The guy survived, so this story had a good outcome. The next call came just a few months ago. I was informed about a rape, and it was the most emotional call. This girl was young, around 20 I think, but I'm not sure. She sounded absolutely distraught. She wasn't crying, but you could tell she had been. Poor girl was running down the sidewalk when some guy just jumped out, pinned her to a wall, and raped her. On top of it, she was a virgin. Thankfully, they caught the guy about a month later after detectives sifted through thousands of hours of footage to find his home and identify him. The military police and the Marine Corps received a call from a frightened woman. She said that children were trying to break into her home. It was just past midnight. We thought it might be some drunk woman, so we answered just to make sure everything was okay. We knocked on her door and introduced ourselves. The woman looked visibly shaken. Her eyes were still swollen. She told us that 4 children with red eyes knocked on her door and asked to come in. When she refused, they became angry. The children terrorized her for about 5 minutes. My partner and I decided to do a quick patrol of the residential area. Each residential area has its own playground. As we approached one of them, we both saw some kids swinging on the swings. It was already curfew, and there shouldn't have been any kids out after 8 p.m. I was damn scared by this, and without looking back, we turned around and just walked away, not saying a word. Later, I read about this incident on the internet. That city is known for its paranormal activity, and it turns out there had been reports of red-eyed children before. Not very scary, but possibly a strange case that I never managed to solve. 3 years ago, I was called to investigate a theft at a cemetery. When we finally entered with the crime scene technicians, it was early morning and no one had been there before us. The 4 arriving officers hadn't gone in either, as they were just securing the area. It was still very dark, and they didn't want to enter the dark mausoleum. Apparently, they felt safer when we arrived. We all went in together. The outer door of the mausoleum had been broken into, and we began to look for signs of theft or vandalism. Eventually, we saw that one of the tomb slabs in the mausoleum, which was about 4.5 meters above ground, had broken. The coffin had fallen out and onto the floor, and all its contents were missing. The urns with ashes were also gone. According to the forensic examiner, it appeared that the slab for the coffin had been damaged due to moisture problems. However, I find it strange that the memorial slab broke just as we entered the mausoleum. No one had entered since 2004, so everything had been there for almost 12 years. The people buried there had only one living relative. I called him. We exchanged pleasantries, and then when I asked him about the mausoleum, he said he didn't speak English and hung up. We received a call from a woman who had been stabbed, and fortunately she survived because we arrived just in time. My good friend and I were directed with another officer to a domestic violence call. We knocked on the door, no answer. We started looking through the windows to see or hear something. I had a bad feeling, but I didn't know why. My friend thought it was a prank. We couldn't enter the house because we weren't sure if it was the right one, and if a crime had really been committed. But something told me to stay. After 15 minutes of knocking, the beast comes out of the house, a woman with stab wounds. Behind her comes a man with bloody hands holding 2 knives. We arrested him. It was strange because usually we just leave if no one answers the door. But something in that moment told me to stay. I don't think I should have told anyone about it. Similar strange things happened to me once. I was working the night shift and received a call from a hospital in our small town. The call was from a security guard who felt uneasy alone. The call was marked as urgent assistance. Upon arriving at the hospital, the guard told me that the nurses heard something they called blood-curdling screams coming from the former psychiatric ward. Upon my arrival, there were no patients or staff there. The door to the ward was transparent in glass, but due to the darkness, nothing could be seen on the other side. I asked for the keys to unlock the door. After turning the key, I grabbed the handle to open the door, but I felt as if someone on the other side was holding the handle and slowly turning it. As a result, my hand also started turning slightly. I was scared, but since it was serious, I still entered the ward and searched the entire room. Nothing. Right after that, the nurses called me from the street. They also heard loud screams. I ran to them in the parking lot, where I was met by another squad, and together we searched the area. Then I went to the local hospital park because I heard a strong creaking noise coming from there. I found 4 swings. 3 of them were completely still. There was no wind, but the 4th one was swinging with such force as if someone was still sitting on it and rocking, gaining height with each swing. I stood in fear for about 30 seconds, but the swing still didn't lose momentum and continued to move. The strangest night of my life. Perhaps this won't be as scary for most of you, but for me it was incredibly terrifying. Maybe because I was 10 years old at the time. My friends and I were hanging out. It was a normal day. One of us suggested calling random people and playing pranks on them. Everyone agreed. We prank called people and had fun until we dialed a random number. A man answered. Pause. I know this might sound boring and some of you may not believe me, but I'm 99% sure it actually happened. When the man answered, he sounded really drunk. Of course he was drunk. He also sounded annoyed because I think we interrupted him. None of us wanted to speak first, but for some reason the man didn't hang up. Minutes later, we heard screams coming from the phone, and it wasn't a joke or prank on us. How ironic. I swear, it sounded very realistic. We thought the man and a woman, probably his wife, were arguing about something, and we wanted to find out how it would end. And we still regret to this day that we didn't hang up then. Suddenly, we heard gunshots. After the shots, and as soon as it happened, we hung up. We were still in shock. The man called us back and warned us not to tell anyone anything and to forget everything we heard. After all that, we didn't say a word and everyone went home in fear. It was foolish and cowardly of us not to report it to anyone. It might not have been a prank after all.